Well, hi. It's good to be back with you again. And today I've got a different kind of video, and I have a feeling that it's going to be going into a series. It's not a series that I had planned to do, but it's something that's been heavy on my heart. And so I have been a little reluctant to share this because part of it will mean that I have to share a little bit about myself more than I'm probably comfortable with. But I just feel a real prodding from the Lord to begin this. So please stick with me. This particular video is going to be about our kids, specifically about us with our children. And I'm talking to adults that have raised children that have gone on to be adults. And what happens when those children become adults and they choose to, for one reason or another, no longer try to be a part of our lives. I have learned several things over my years that no one really told me, and yet they have become part of my being. So I'm only going by my own experience when I say the first thing I've learned is you don't get out of this life alive. Now, that makes sense to us, but what I'm saying with that is if you are here for any reasonable amount of time, you can count on your heart being broken. You can count on suffering loss. And the second thing is you can count on at some point in your life, you will find yourself alone. Now, whether that means that you are alone through divorce or death or estrangement or whatever the circumstance, you're probably going to find yourself in a place where you didn't think you were going to be. And I guess that's what this came out of, was that video that I had made a week ago. Are you really where you thought you would be? Today, I wanted to talk about loss. I wanted to talk about grieving. And I wanted to talk about grieving not through death, but through estrangement, through the breaking down of relationships, especially those that we have with our children. If you are a parent, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions. The first assumption is that when you had a child, you chose to do everything you could to be the best parent you can be. I was raised in the baby boomer generation, and my parents were raised with the idea that us as children, we would be seen and not heard. And, if you want to have something to cry about, I will give it to you. And sayings like that became part of us. And we just knew we were to be there, but not really demanding any type of emotional support. There's often things on Facebook, crazy little memes and stuff about how we grew up as those baby boomers, where we were on the playground where we would sit on that metal slide and go down with our butt on fire, or we would swing around the playground equipment with our hair on fire. And we also knew that we would go out in the morning and we would be gone until supper time. And then we would go back out until the streetlights went on, and then we would head home. And that's just, for me, I was raised in suburbia, but that's the way I was raised. I had very little to do with my parents. They were not going to be my counselor. They were not my friend. They were just there. They were my parents. Occasionally, we would take a trip together and go to the beach or something like that. But I do not remember the Waltons type of upbringing. And I didn't know much about raising kids myself. I just knew that I had a rough childhood, not because of those things, but because there were other things that I'm not going to go into now, but that there was some abuse going on by family members. And it caused me to develop certain patterns of protection. Well, when I got married, I left home at about 17 and got an apartment with a girlfriend, and I got married at 19. And as soon as I got married, I packed up my stuff with my husband and moved 3,000 miles away. I moved from one end of the country to the other, as far as away as I could go. And I didn't step back into my homeland, my hometown, for 4 years. At the beginning of that fourth year after being married, I had my first child. I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. Thankfully, someone who worked with me, his wife was about 10 years older than me, and she kind of guided me through those first couple of weeks. I had tried to nurse the baby, and I took her to the doctors after a week and a half, and they said, "You're starving this child." I didn't know. I knew nothing, but there was an inner drive within me to be the best parent that I could be, to give that daughter everything that I thought I didn't have, to grow up to have tea parties and tents in the yard and baby dolls and Barbie dolls, and to do the very best. When my daughter was 6 months old or 7 months old, I didn't know, and I gave her a tortilla chip, and she choked on the tortilla chip. And I remember thinking she's going to die in my arms. And I was flipping her upside down and doing everything I could and banging her on the back and doing Heimlich. Thank God I didn't break anything, trying to save this child. And I came away from the experience terrified because I realized that I could not keep this child alive on my own. I remember she was running across the backyard in one of those little walkers that they used to have that were totally death traps. And she hit a bump and went down, and she got a cut on her chin and it started bleeding. And I did not know what to do. And I took her next door to the woman next door and I said, "Help me, she's going to bleed to death." Well, the girl calmed me down and calmed my daughter down. And she still has a tiny scar there. She didn't need stitches or anything, but I just found myself totally frantic about how I was going to raise this child. Over the next few years, I kind of got my bearings. I didn't have my second child until my daughter was 4, and I had learned a little more by then. And I determined that I was going to be the best mom on the planet. When my daughter turned 3 or 4, I started making her clothes, and I sewed all of her clothes painstakingly, and cute little outfits and little jumpers and just everything I could. And then she went into the Barbie doll phase, and I sewed Barbie doll clothes, and I made sure that I was out there in whatever weather I had to get her a Cabbage Patch doll. I mean, I went above and beyond. Her brother was born, and then there were two to take care of. And then 4 years later, I had another child. So I ended up with 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. They're all adults now with children of their own. And unfortunately, over the years, those relationships have been severed. And I have to be honest and say it has broken me. I did everything I could. Was I the perfect mom? No, I have yet to meet that person, but I know that in my heart, nothing left my heart to injure them. My problem was that the marriage that I was in was so toxic that it just basically, by the end, it tore the family apart. And I really don't want to go into the reasons why I'm estranged from my children. But I remember probably 10 years ago, after the divorce and after I had married my second husband, who was a Black man, and my son, my youngest son, did not approve of that. And he wrote me a letter on my birthday and basically told me what a bad mom I had been and how damaged he was. And he never wanted to see me again. That was the only time in my life where I went to bed that night and prayed that I wouldn't wake up the next morning. I was devastated. I was broken. The divorce that came with my first husband was toxic, and it was abusive, and sides were drawn. And that's all I'm going to say about that at this time, because that's as comfortable as I can get with that. But what I wanted to talk to today is the person who has walked in those shoes, to the person who, whether they did it right or didn't do it right, they find themselves later in life missing the very thing that they gave birth to, missing those children. And when I first married my first husband, I was not a Christian. I did not become a Christian until I was 33 years old, when my youngest son was born. So I had two children basically being in the world. And I had no one to turn to. I didn't have parents that I could ask. I didn't have close friends that I could turn to. It was me and me. And I put up a lot of barriers around me to protect myself and to protect my kids. What I want to talk to you about today is things that I have learned since coming to Christ, things that I have had to learn because my picture did not turn out the way I thought it was going to be. My family tree is pretty empty right now. And I find myself in a position where those kids have gone on to have kids, but I don't have them in my life for one reason or another. I always used to take great pride in reading the story of King David because I knew in the back of my mind that King David was actually hunted down by one of his sons, Absalom. And I thought if King David could come out of it unscathed or making, being able to carry on, certainly I can carry on. Lately, I've decided to go back and study the life of King David. And the more I find out, the more I realize, again, going back to point number 1 or 2, we don't get out of this unscathed. We read through the scriptures about people who had issues. We read the story of Joseph, where he was thrown into a pit and thrown into a jail and wrongly accused, and his brothers hated him, and they pretended he was dead, and they tried to kill him. And we breeze on past that like, wow, that must have been really bad. But look at what happened at the end. He got his brothers back, and he was in the big place of kingship, and it all worked out. But not enough time is devoted to what Joseph felt like at the bottom of that pit and what he felt like as a young boy as they put him on that wagon and took him to Egypt, and what he felt like running for his life from Pharaoh's wife, and how he sat in prison in the dark. This wasn't a prison like we have today. This was a prison where it was mud and stones and mice and bugs and horrid. We don't think about that. We just look at the end. And then we go to the story of Job. Oh, we all know the story of Job. Job lost everything. He was tempted and he did not sin against God. He held faithful to the Lord and he lost everything. But then as we read the story of Job at the end, we say everything was given back to him. But you know what? Everything wasn't given back to him. He still lost his children. He still lost everything he had at the beginning. Now, did God give him other things later and bless him? Yes. But we do not spend any time looking at the story of Job and what took place in him as he lost those things that were important to him. And so I went to do a study on King David and on his children because I knew there was more to the story. We see King David as someone who, he took the stones and he slew the giant, and he went out and, he was running around for his life, but he was in that cave, and Saul was there, and all he did was take a little piece of the robe. He didn't kill him. And, he did this and he did that. And he had a friend, Jonathan, and Jonathan was killed, but and it just goes on, and we flip past these verses and we don't get into the mindset of what happened to these people. And I could not think of one person in scripture that went through their life without problems, without heartache, and without hurt. Sometimes as pastors, we go to give the antidote of how, we're going to have our best life now and everything's going to be okay. And that's like the goal. We just have to push through. We just have to be encouragement. I was looking at some things on here, and there's thousands of books, self-help books, thousands of books on how to overcome, how to defeat the enemy, how to make our minds clean, how to be that best life now. And there's very few books that say you are going to suffer, as First Peter tells us. You will have trials and you will have temptations and you will hurt. And somehow, as a church, we have treated our congregations as something that if we give the right words, that it's all going to wash away and everything's going to be fine. And what we need to do as pastors is try to get those people through those things and onto the better life. And sometimes we go through life and we are hurting. And sometimes that pain does not go away as instantly as we thought. And sometimes we find ourselves exhausted to where we just think, how do we keep going? Where is God? Why did he desert me? Why am I in this place? So I wanted to go back and I wanted to look at King David, and specifically today to look at his children, because I know that David suffered. We all know the end of the story with David. He was the one that was seeking after God's own heart. But over the next couple videos, I want to start tracing some of the things that happened to David, because he suffered great loss. He suffered loss of his children. He suffered loss in the battlefield. He suffered loss due to sin. He suffered loss of everything around him. Somehow he was able to maintain, and I want to know how he did that. I don't know if you know, but I didn't know that David had, they think, at least 19 children with so many different wives. I didn't know that. Many of them are mentioned. There's about 4 or 5 that become main characters in David's life, and those are the ones we're going to take a look at today. The first one, his firstborn, was Amnon, Amnon, and he was the firstborn son. And he was actually killed by his brother. The next son that he had was Absalom. Absalom was the second son. And he was killed as well. The word only mentions one daughter, and that was Tamar. And Tamar was raped by one of David's sons, Absalom. Think about that for a minute. Here we have David, and he's got this going on, this dysfunction, this sin running rampant in his house, where his own daughter was raped by a half brother. David found out about it. And what did David do? Absolutely nothing. He did not say anything to the son who had raped his daughter. Think about the dynamic that had in that family. His other son, Amnon, was so angry with this that 3 years later, he set up a trap and he killed Absalom. The word doesn't tell us much what happened to Tamar after this. But one thing that is mentioned is it says that she just kind of disappeared and lived almost like a hermit life. So while we read the stories about how David is the mighty warrior and David is the king and David is doing all these things and having all these battles and all these victories, his home life was a freaking mess. I have been in a position before where I have been in the car with my three kids and my first husband, and we were driving to church, and everybody was screaming at one another. And one of us would call out, "Everybody, church smiles, we're going to church." And when we walked into church, we were well dressed, well spoken, and nobody knew that we had a battlefield at home. My battlefield was different than David's, but there was a lot of anger and a lot of chaos and a lot of pain in that house. The next son that he had, the fourth son, was Adoniah, and he actually grew up and tried to usurp the throne. See, because he figured since the first two sons were gone, that because Absalom was killed by Ammon was killed by Moab, and then we had Adoniah. He tried to usurp the throne thinking he was going to be king, and he ended up being killed after David's death by another son, Solomon. So you can see how that perpetuated itself, and one sin led to another, and there was chaos in that home. I could go on and on with things that happened with David with his children, but you get the idea. It was not a good place to be. And although David was out there being the king, there were definite problems at home and chaos. And that chaos led David to a point of despair. We all know about the son that he had with Bathsheba that died. And the word tells us, if we look up the grief of David, that's the story that will come up, where he was on his face weeping and lamenting. And then when he found out the child was dead, he brushed himself off and went in to worship the Lord and went back to life. So what do we learn from all of this? Is there anything that we can take away other than this life is messed up? Is there anything that we can learn by looking at David and how he handled grief that can help us? Because frankly, grief and mourning are not talked about enough. I never knew what real grief was until my second husband died. My parents had died, but like I said, I was not that close to them. I had dogs that died, and that was depressing. But I had grandparents that died. But when Ken died, I found out what real grief was. And it was incapacitating. It was something that crippled me. It was something where I didn't even know how to get from one day to the next. I had a home here in Ashland at the time, and I had this huge, big, round ottoman. And I would get next to that ottoman, and I would put my hands up, and I would pray, and I would weep for hours. And I remember my dog, Bosco, sitting next to me, the poor little dog, just frantic because he didn't know what was going on. And that was day after day. When I finally went back to work a couple weeks later, I was a trainer and I was teaching a class to adults, and they went on break, and I had to get another teacher to come in. I went in and I went outside and sat under a tree. I was kind of like sitting under the broom tree, and I was saying, I can't do this. And another trainer came out and said, Cindy, you got to get up. And I'm like, I can't go on. So if you've ever been in a place of grief like that, you know that feeling that everybody in the world can talk until they're blue in the face, but you are so broken, you are so distraught that mourning doesn't even begin to express what is going on. It's a heaving within your belly. It's a breaking of your heart that can't be fixed, and it goes on day after day after day. And just when you think it's going away, it comes back again. And a memory comes back, and you find yourself at the same place. That same type of grieving is what took place with me when my children chose to not have me in their lives. It was a severing. I went through times where I could not function. I didn't know how to go on. I had birthed these children. I had rocked them in my arms. I had fed them. I had nurtured them. I had been with them in the ER. I had been there at football games. I had gone to dances. I had been at Girl Scouts. You name it, I was there, and all of a sudden it was gone. And that grief overtook me. And I, at times, didn't know how to handle it. And I will be honest, I am still grieving. There are still times when my mind goes to places where I think, oh, if I could, maybe if I called, or if I said the right words, or if I did this, or if I did that, and things would be good, and we'd be sitting around eating turkey together, and the grandkids would be over there with me. And no. And it smacks me in the face every time I have to stop myself and say, no, Cindy, that's not going to happen. And I'm coming to you with this not as to be a discouragement to you, but to try to guide you through these times that will come. Like I said, nobody gets through life by not being hurt, and usually by those that are closest to you. We have to find a way when those things happen, whether it be through death or loss, or whether it be through someone just deciding that we're not their cup of tea. We are not responsible for our children. When they reach adulthood, they make their own choices. Nothing that you say, nothing that you do will change their mind. They are a product of who they have become, and they are going to make their own choices. And sometimes they're going to make choices that are going to be very, very painful to you. It doesn't matter whose reality it is. I'll tell you, I've gone back and I've looked at every situation and thought, well, if I'd have done this different, maybe if I'd have done that, and if I tried harder here, and if I'd have said that, or if I hadn't said that. But the bottom line is, I'm not responsible for them. For a while, I blamed my son's spouse for turning him against me, because that seemed easier than admitting that my son didn't want to talk to me. But that's not the truth, because my son is a grown man and he has to make his own choices, and he has made his own choices. And his choice for him was, I'm more trouble than I'm worth in his life. And I see what had happened because of my choice of marrying the person I did, their father, and what had taken place. Although I thought I was doing all the right things, it didn't matter. So the first thing I want to tell you today is, it doesn't matter whose fault it was. There will come a time for forgiveness, and maybe for something words to be said, but for you to heal, you need to come to the place to understand that there is nothing that you can do to go back and change anything that has taken place. You cannot change the way they feel. You cannot change the way they act toward you. The only thing you can do is be in a position where you can ask God to heal you. We know more than anything that David had a life that was not always pleasing to the Lord. And I'm the first to admit I did not do it all right. And I could sit here and say, but I did this and I did that, but it doesn't matter. The bottom line is, when it comes down to it, at the end of this life, who's it going to be that's going to stand before the Lord? Me with all my chitlins next to me, or me in front of the Lord? And it's going to be me in front of the Lord, just me. And so you need to find a way to heal through the pain, to get yourself through the pain. And the only way you can do that is through Yeshua, through Yahweh, through turning to the one who created you, that knows your every fiber. The word tells us that he collects all of our tears in a jar. And I've got a big jar. And some of you might have a big jar, and some of you might be thinking about this as you're listening to it and thinking, I'm crying just thinking about it because I'm tired. But we have a God who sees us and has not left us. And He is going to allow things to come into our life that at times feel like they will break us. Why? For a couple of reasons. Number one, we live in a sin filled world. Number two, people make their own choices. And number three, God is always going to be there to correct, to discipline, to train, to teach in everything. He's not going to leave you. My biggest fear my whole life was that I would be abandoned. I clung on to every relationship I had like it was a lifeline to get me out of the sinking mire. But I realized after Ken died, I can't change anything. No thing, no man, no child is going to complete me. Nobody's going to save me. Nobody's coming to get me except Yeshua, except the Lord. And that has got to be your lifeline. You can go out and read books. You can go to grief seminars. You can talk to your friends. You can talk to your neighbors. You can spill all over the place to everybody who will listen. But the only way that you are going to find inner peace is by going to the one who created you and knows every fiber of your being. Psalm 55:22 says, pile your troubles on God's shoulders. He'll carry your load. He will help you out. He will never let good people topple into ruin. There may be times in your healing where you think you won't make it. I know that after the separation with my daughter and the grandchildren a year ago, I didn't think I would make it. But I can sit here today stronger in the Lord and knowing I can't change her. All I can do is love her and pray for her. I have forgiven her. I have asked for forgiveness for anything that I have done that has been out of line. And then I move on and I hang on to the Lord. Over the next few videos, I'm going to take some time to hopefully teach you how to hang on to the Lord when the cord feels like it's going to break. And the first thing and the only thing I can say is get on your knees. You are not surprising him. You are not bringing him anything that he can't handle. He does not get tired of you coming to him. And when nothing else helps, you just cry out, help me. Help me. I can't do this alone. I can't make it alone. I need you. He's not going to let you down. You need to be in the Word. No self-help book is going to get you from point A to point B. The only thing that is going to help you is to get in the Word. And you're going to have to force yourself. You're going to have to force yourself because your mind doesn't want to go there. Your mind wants to sit on the couch and suck your thumb. But when you pick up the Word and you continue to read it, He will minister to you. I know that each time I have cried out, it's only a matter of 30 minutes, and I can feel myself back in a position where I felt like, I got this. We're going to be okay. So what I want you to do is, if you are in this position, is to read Psalm 23. And I know you know it. I could quote it verse by verse, but that's what we're going to be studying probably in the next video, because that is your lifeline. You read it over and over and over, and you say out loud, I trust you. I believe you. I know you are there for me. I know you will get me through. I know you have not forgotten me. I know you love me. I know you care for me. And I know that I am yours. So that's what I wanted to talk about today because we are in the end times and I can feel it in my spirit. There's not much time left and the world is about to change and it's about to get really ugly. And I just wanted to put out there, excuse me, that if you are seeing this and your world has changed and you are totally confused, remember, he does not sleep nor slumber. He's got you. Till next time.